Yeah, good morning. I have decided to record potentially a much longer form video. Um, like ideally I'll keep it short, but the best laid plans of mice and men. Um, and really what I want to go over is something that I've sort of been struggling with, wrestling with for a bit of time. Um, at least since back when I first moved into content creation, I don't know, a couple months ago on Instagram, and then you realize that like that sort of form of media length just doesn't suit sort of what I really want to do. Um, and I'm going to respond to uh, an Instagram user, Professor Kevin Carnahan, and we'll go over a little bit of sort of like who he is from what I can see on a surface level and sort of why it is that I want to sort of go over some of the things that he's saying. But actually, what I want this video to be though is a real life worked example of how like a grown human has to go through the process of uh, processing intellectually and emotionally um, people that they encounter, right? And specifically, what I mean by that is this. Um, the reason I've wanted to respond to this guy for a while and haven't, um, but it started with Instagram initially, is he frustrates me. He's somebody that every time I encounter his content, um, sort of uh, just naturally, um, I I end up leaving pissed off, and that's really interesting because it sort of is an indicator that he's doing something, and I really want to like figure out and pick apart what he's doing. But to do that, I actually need to let go of the emotion. I need to be able to sort of address it in a neutral manner and understand what it is about me that when I see how he produces content and what it is about what he's doing that causes me to feel the way that I do, right? Rather than just holding on to that emotion and trying to attack him. And so, like, thankfully, I have a degree of like maturity. And like when I first created a video in response to something that I saw, I can't recall if I posted it and immediately deleted it or chose not to post it in the first place, but I didn't feel that it was a good representation of the kind of content I was trying to produce on Instagram in the first place. And now at least I feel like I, having recently encountered some of the content again, have a decent enough understanding of like how it is that I want to approach um, breaking down his content as somebody who views it. Where the point of this video is not then necessarily to critique everything that he says, but actually to be a live demonstration basically of how I handle both intellectual and emotional discord within myself, right? Where I'm going to be encountering ideas that I potentially disagree with, and I'm also going to be encountering ways in which those ideas are presented that are that cause emotional friction within myself, and that uh, I want this to be sort of hopefully as best as I can a work demonstration of how I handle the feeling and process and regulate the feeling before I then go after the ideas in order to not fall into traps like ad hominem, and to actually then, more importantly, give credit where credit is due, where he does say things that are good and are correct, and not just to sort of one brush stroke, paintbrush him as a single color, but instead to understand the nuance of who this person is. Now, I'll I'll bring up one of his pages.
Guiding narrative.
Before we do this. We're gonna go here. No, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna do. Yeah, okay. We'll just leave that here. All right. So we're gonna do this. We'll go back to here. Let's throw this over to this one. Um, just so you don't have my OBS in the background. Um, but like, let's actually go over just really briefly who this guy is. So this is actually the video that I saw recently that makes me want to sort of address it. But generally speaking, before we do, I think it's worth like understanding who this person is. So he identifies as professor of philosophy and religion. He works at Central Methodist University. He's got a PhD. Um, I guess from Southern Methodist University. I assume that that's what that's saying. And then, you know, like he does these things, right? And he's in the content creation game, and you can see that. This is how he produces mainly his content, right? It's clickbaity. 2000, 2000, 15K, 2000, 2000, right? But they're all disappointed Jesus stitches incoming, right? Um, and that's sort of like its own separate thing that I think is like worth addressing generally in terms of the content before we get into specific ideas, which is that this gentleman is not producing content to educate people. And I don't mean that his content isn't necessarily factually correct or in some way informative. What I mean is that he's producing content because he's got 126,000 followers, so he keeps using the same formula that gets people to click on it. And what I want to sort of really get into is the fact that I think that that formula causes him to fall for at times the same traps that he accuses other people of doing. And like, you know, disappointed Jesus stitch incoming is a really good example. Like that's obviously emotional, you know, like clickbait. It's like, oh, Jesus would be disappointed in this person. That's his whole shtick. That's his whole uh, way of doing things. It's, in fact, I would say incredibly uncreative because he's doing the same thing over and over because it just works, right? It's a byproduct of the algorithm system. It's like people won't make content like I do, where it doesn't guarantee clicks if that's sort of the thing that rewards them, and then they like doing it and they keep making it. Before I get into that, some context about me that I think is just like worth talking about. So I grew up in a household full of domestic violence, both emotional and physical. I was a victim of it. Um, and without getting into too much of the detail, you know, I have obviously done a lot of processing and I have had a lot of growth and since then. But there were specifically like the aspects in that is that my household was also conservative Christian, and not just in a cultural sense, in a doctrinal sense. That is to say that like my experience with Christianity as somebody who used to even identify as Christian and the Bible itself was inherently tied to my situation. The violence against me was justified through Scripture. Um, and you know, you could get into the nitty gritty of whether or not it was a valid justification, but I want to make it very clear that like that was actually specifically at one point in time a direct connection of you get hit because the Bible says blah, right? And not like a misquote either, but like tied to real content from, you know, a generally used version of the Bible, right? Not just some like weird niche one where like somebody's taken some extra bit of scripture and nobody else uses that version of the Bible. It's like, okay, so that's my context, and so that's worth noting. It's like I have to address this when I engage in this content. It's like I have a bias. Like there's no getting around that. And I feel this strongly whenever I encounter people with regards to Christianity in particular, is and maybe there's like a genuine justification behind this. Christianity is my culture. Just because I've like thrown it off because I actually see it for what it is doesn't mean it's not my culture. So, you know, I'm going to attack Christians and I'm going to attack their ideas and I'm going to attack their values. And it comes from a perspective of knowing. It comes from a perspective of living through that. Doesn't mean that my attacks are always correct. No, it doesn't mean that my ideas about it and why I think it's bad are always correct. Like, no. And so I'm going to try and keep that nuance. But I think it's important that, like, anybody watching this video understands that, like, yeah, I come from a position of bias, but I also come from a position of like knowing, and I don't think I know anywhere near as much as this guy does. He's got some nuanced takes, but like I have also formally studied religion and the Bible and apologetics um, in a much younger life when I was still identifying as Christian. I've then like since then also just studied philosophy generally and studied ethics and so like I have some perspectives, but it's always still going to ultimately come from some kind of position of ignorance. The same way that this guy, and I think this is not seen in his content, is obviously going to be at some points ignorant on some kinds of topics, and that's really what I want to address here. Anyway, so the video that I saw recently and why I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this.
But definitely the center of these stories is like, do not be curious.
These two people are spreading ignorant modernist mythology. Modernist mythology is an...
Cool. Let's start with this. These two people are spreading ignorant modernist mythology. It's a really intense take. It's not one of, hey, two educated people are speaking on something that they aren't actually as educated on as I am. Let me add some context. So that's his beginning position.
Oversimplified guiding narrative that tells us that everything that's modern is good and
now he ascribes a whole extra layer to their message that isn't there, right? That isn't explicitly there at the very least. Maybe it is implicitly, we'll see how well he argues it. But he's saying that they're adding this narrative that everything that's modern is good. And
everything that's historical or ancient is bad.
Everything that's historical or ancient is bad. Okay, that's what he's arguing. He's basically trying to argue these modernist people are ignorant, and they're ignorant because they think modern things are good and old things are bad. And I'm here to tell you the truth.
History is the Dark Ages. Modernity is the Enlightenment.
So this is our framing. They didn't say that history is the Dark Ages. They didn't say that modernity is enlightenment, right? This is what a professor, a guy with a PhD who's in charge of educating other people, is adding. You know, like maybe that was in the original video. Like, so I'm very understanding that. Like, I watch Hannah Fry and I watch Vsauce, like not regularly, but I'm aware of how they do their content. That's a long form discussion that they're having. So we've only seen a tiny little clip. Maybe there's that other context, but we don't have it. So we're sort of just being told by this guy that this is what they're actually doing, even though it's not demonstrated in the little clip that he shows.
History is ignorance. Modernity is science.
History is ignorance, modernity is science. It's like, I think it's very, you know, like, let's be real. I don't think Hannah Fry and Michael Vsauce would ever think that modernity is science and history is ignorance, because I think, you know, it's really clear that a lot of science happened throughout history, right? Like where do we think we got the ideas of science from, right? And they would know this. They're not stupid, right? They're not ignorant. They're not spreading some kind of myth about how the world works, right? So they're trying to engage in some kind of intellectual discussion, and instead of coming in with that context and adding correction where it's needed, where two smart people are maybe less informed than this guy is, he's instead like one paintbrush stroke, painting them in a certain light. Okay.
And these two are perpetuating this mythology by misreading history.
Now that's a better take. Maybe they are perpetuating this mythology. The past was always ignorant and the future is now and full of, enlightenment. But I think it's another thing to say that they're doing it on purpose, and that's seemingly the position that this guy has started with.
Curiosity is something humans have had forever, and yet our social attitude towards it has changed.
So that is actually their premise. Our social attitude towards curiosity has changed, but we've had curiosity forever. Okay, that's what they're talking about. So let's get into it.
1,500 years.
1,500 years.
Considered a vice. St. Augustine said that curiosity was lust of the eye. He called it a disease, Michael.
He called curiosity a disease. All right. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know. He probably wasn't speaking English, St. Augustine. So we're going to get into a little bit of the etymology of certain words that they're quoting, and maybe Hannah's done a bad job, or maybe she's like sort of misrepresented a little bit for an interesting story. We'll find out.
Aquinas, he was the same. He called it curiositas and said that it was a vice, as opposed to studiositas, which is studying, but only the kind that God signs off on.
So, okay, there is a little weight there in terms of this interpretation of what like Aquinas is saying with regards to like curiositas versus like studiositas. Was that the Latin word? I can't remember exactly what it is. Where like studiositas is like the kind of study that God signs off on. Now that's an interesting moral weight, and whether or not that's true is a separate thing to discuss. And like you would hope that this professor would weigh in here in a way that is like informative. We'll see.
So like asking questions about the world around you is not considered a good thing.
Yeah, so that
Asking questions about the world around you is not considered a good thing. Now, this guy's going to just say that this isn't true, and we'll get into whether or not like his argument is good.
that's entirely wrong. It turns out words.
That's entirely wrong. So historically asking questions about the world around you was not considered a bad thing, ever. Wow, okay, entirely wrong.
Change meaning over time.
Was change
and the
meaning,
meaning
sure.
of curiositas and curiosity are not the same. Curiositas, which both Augustine and Thomas Aquinas were talking about.
So they're both talking about it, okay.
Is what drives you to want to know everything about your neighbors so that you can gossip about them.
So this is really interesting. Like, maybe this is true. Maybe curiositas is about only gossiping about, your neighbors. This invasion of privacy is effectively what this is like an equivalent to, right? The same way that like, we don't want everybody spying on us, not necessarily because we've got something to hide, but because like actually just privacy is like a thing that like we should be respectful of, because as humans, like it's good to do things in private before we bring them out publicly, because sometimes we think and do things in private that we need to do by ourselves to then be a better version of ourselves in public, right?
It's the kind of thing that we might today call nosiness.
So
that is
he's
exactly
equating it to nosiness.
not pursuing profitable questions about the world around you. What they're categorizing as curiosity, asking questions about the world, would fall under Thomas Aquinas' system into studiositas.
So his argument is that they're just getting it completely wrong. But I think we'll find out this is not the case.
Turns out that, like all thoughtful people across history, Augustine and Thomas Aquinas recognized that not all forms of knowledge should be pursued.
Not all forms of knowledge should be pursued. Now, this is really interesting, because, like, on the privacy side of things for individuals, maybe that's true, but I'm gonna get into the nitty-gritty of, like, whether or not this is, like, only the way in which, these two people have thought about this.
Ironically, these two people were not actually curious enough about history to learn what the people in history were actually talking about. And they weren't actually interested, probably because they are so enthralled to the modern mythology.
Okay. The straw manning speculation is outrageous here. And this gets to the heart of why every time I encounter a video from Professor Kevin Carnahan, he causes in me a visceral emotional response. So what I want to get into here is this. This man is allegedly a professor of philosophy. And when it comes to philosophy, the approach we are taught is steel manning. That is to say, if you are presented with a bad argument, instead of taking the easy dunk on the bad argument, you make that argument better. You strengthen it in ways where it might be weak, and you genuinely go in and address the intellectual content that has validity and even expand upon it before you then try and pick it apart. And then the inverse of that is straw manning, where you don't even take what is presented to you, you in fact embellish it in certain ways and weaken it in others, so that it becomes this distorted picture of what was initially presented, in order to even more easily critique it and address it. This guy is a professor. He studied philosophy. He's doing like, you learn this in first year philosophy, not to do this. That is outrageous. And I know why he's doing it, I think, right? Like, obviously I can't know, but I think I know why he's doing it. It's because he's been trained through the algorithm that this is the content that gets him views. So it makes sense that he's, over time, learnt to do this for Instagram, because when he does it, it works well, right? This is just basic human psychology. I press the button, and sometimes I get a reward, and sometimes I don't get a reward. Okay, I'm going to press the button a whole lot of times. I'm like obviously drawing an analogy from the study on rats, right? Which is like inconsistent reward, like drives like addictive behavior. Basically, it's like, okay, I don't always get a reward. I'm going to spam the button, and so because like sometimes I get the reward, sometimes I don't. What is spamming the button in this analogy that I'm drawing? I'm basically establishing that the idea of him spamming the button is actually his experimentation with a form of social media content creation that works. And his framework is this. It's the disappointed stitch in coming framework. It's the way he has shifted away from what he, is meant to be actually doing as a professor of philosophy, which is steel manning, into literally a prior to first year, like high school students do this, right? High school students fabricate arguments of people that they disagree with, and then don't engage with their ideas properly, and then equate even more like meaning to what's being said, and draw extended conclusions from what's being said that aren't actually there, right? So they're enthralled by modern mythology. That's what this guy is claiming.
That they are here spreading. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas are disappointed. They should do better.
All right. Now, this is the last bit that really pisses me off and really makes me sick. And so I'm going to try and process those emotions before I then sort of critique sort of the overall argument. The reason that last phrase always leaves me fuming is because, whether intended or not, and I think it is intended, because I think if it weren't, he would have recognized it by now, but again, maybe I'm wrong. I think he is intending to be on a moral high ground here. Somehow he is, this spout of truth and of reason and of logic, and he's able to come in and do away with the propagandists that are Michael and Hannah, and instead critique them and show these guys are perpetuating lies because they're enthralled with the mythology, right? Like, that's the emotional through line that we're getting. And then he seals it with this stamp of, they should do better. I am disappointed. That's really what he's saying. When he's saying, Thomas and blah, blah, blah are disappointed, like, no, they're not. They're dead. Like, you don't get to speak on behalf of other people. But he's using that as an appeal to, effectively, authority, because he's saying that he's disappointed, right? Right, he's saying he's disappointed. And it's like, I could do the same for him. I could say, as somebody who's a professor in the public image, it's actually, and I'm going to use some emotional terms for a second, to me it is disgusting and abhorrent the level of misrepresentation that occurs in such a short time frame about two people that are obviously very intellectually curious about the world. If this man knows anything about Hannah and Michael, and maybe he doesn't, but if he does, then it's actually vile what he's doing. But then I want to speak more broadly. Is like, what if he doesn't know Michael and Hannah? What if this is just genuinely a clip he's come across and he's just responding to it the way he responds to lots of other clips of people that he probably doesn't know? Well, then let's get into that, which is, this man is a professor. His job is to teach. His job is to educate people. He isn't doing that here. He is instead giving people a emotional topology to latch onto, to allow themselves to feel good about something. And so I'm going to get into what that something is, because I think that's tied to sort of all of his content generally. But let's read this fun comment, because I saw this on Instagram, and I think it's a brilliant example, because he's got a reply to this comment as well. So this person has said, checking some references on this. All right, cool. So this person's checking what this man has done. Curiositas is not just nosiness. So if you land on a false argument right there. Now, here's the thing. Maybe this person's wrong. Maybe curiositas is really nosiness. It's an intemperate investigation, and what is intemperate, blah, blah, blah. So he talks about that a little bit. And then what this person does, I think rightfully so, is he links the specific quotes of St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas to the general culture that we saw, at least locally, of certain aspects of the church when it came to intellectual curiosity and how they went about banning things, and stopping us from knowing things. Maybe there are other reasons, right? Now, we'll get into that in a second. The rest of this argument, there's this ad hominem attack on the two individuals. Yeah, this person sees it straight away. Kevin is attacking Hannah and Michael. He's strawmanning them. He's not steelmanning them, right? It's clearly attacking because he's attributing motive to them that doesn't exist, right? He's saying they're so enthralled by mythology, they're perpetuating this modern myth, but the way he sets it up is as if it's intentional, rather than like you don't go to 5-year-olds who think that you can land on the sun and say they are perpetuating the modern myth of anti-science, right? It's like, because 5-year-olds have to learn certain things. They have to learn the process of critical thinking, etc. And it's like, okay, so what am I saying about Hannah and Michael? I'm not saying that they're 5-year-olds. I'm saying that when it comes to understanding history, it's like Hannah and Michael have backgrounds in science and maths. Right, that's really important. It's like they are incredibly rational people. They're capable of incredible logic and reasoning. And what this gentleman here is more of an expert in, compared to them, and compared to me, is going to be the expertise that he has with regards to like cultural tradition and history and religion. And so he's weighing in on like the etymology of certain words that are being used here. But like his expertise is basically in being able to look at history and add like depth to it that maybe Michael and Hannah lack in their ability, because it's not something they've practiced a whole lot. Well, then the real question is, should he be attacking them in this video? And it's like, no, they're not experts like him, right? Just because they present a bad idea doesn't mean they're doing it on purpose. Just because they have not necessarily perfect methodology for this kind of like investigative understanding of sort of history, and he's got a better framework, doesn't mean that they're doing it on purpose. So yeah, there is clearly ad hominem going on. He's like, I'm not sure how many logical fallacies that relies on, but extrapolating a poor argument about etymology into an entire worldview seems like a straw man argument. Exactly what I was saying, right? So here's the thing. I never fully read this comment, which is really nice, because then I get to see, okay, somebody else is seeing it like me. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right, but it means that, like, okay, it looks like I'm following this person's logic, and it's slightly different to mine, but we're sort of going along the same path. Okay, that's interesting. Which is basically, yeah, they have logical fallacies, but he's extrapolating it, they have bad etymological understanding. But then he's extrapolating that into their entire worldview, and it's like that's what I was saying is basically straw manning. And this, I think, this is really well put. It's better well put than I sort of did. I think they said nothing of the sort, and if you had done your homework, you would understand that Hannah Fry praises ancient mathematics. Exactly. I have encountered Hannah Fry before, right? It's like he's critiquing them for not having done their homework. Meanwhile, it's clear he's not done his own homework, which is just really funny. Because again, it's like this guy's an expert on understanding history, so maybe he already knows this stuff, but he's clearly not an expert on Hannah or Michael. He clearly doesn't understand how they behave, generally speaking, and where they're how they pursue understanding things. And if he did, he wouldn't have been foolish enough to make this video, right? He has a response here, and I think this is brilliant. Or maybe he didn't have a response here. Oh, he didn't. It was this guy. Yeah, okay, whatever. Well, this guy's wrong. You're complaining a bunch of things to create a clumsy gotcha, and it's like, no, they're not. Again, this is a general sweeping statement. Anytime there's general sweeping statements, you lose nuance. Anytime you're losing nuance, you're basically not steel manning, you're straw manning, right? So it's like, this person isn't complaining a bunch of things to create a clumsy gotcha. That's what Jeremy Bider is doing here. It's like, this person has a very complex, maybe poorly worded, maybe not explicitly drawn out, assessment of this video, and I think it's decently put, and then he comes up, I don't know who this person is, guitar lawyer, comes up with a conclusion at the very end in terms of their assessment, and this guy needs to do better. Why? Because he's a professor, because his job is educating. Now, let's tie this into my bigger problem, which is, from what I can see, I think the general broad, dare I say, propaganda that this person produces. And I'm going to dare to say propaganda, but I really want to justify that before anybody watching me sort of believes that immediately. This guy is a professor of philosophy and religion, and he is strongly associated with the Methodist practice, is my understanding. I've not really fully determined what this man believes, and at some points he makes, I think, very good videos that are very critical of the religious shortcomings that I see within Christianity and have grown up with, where people just don't use logic. But then it's so interesting that he's able to do that against Christians and be like, this is silly apologetics, blah, blah, blah. But then somehow he'll always seemingly double down on the reliability and validity, or to some extent, of the overall Christian cultural practice, and then can make a video like this that's basically against people who are trying to do science, right? I guess tying back into that as well, this general vibe of people trying to do science. Let's just talk really briefly about like what Hannah and Michael might have actually been getting at, that this guy just, whether intentionally or not, was completely blind to. The church historically has tried to censor science. Like, you learn about this in high school with Galileo, and the whole, like, hey, maybe Earth's not the center of things. Maybe we got that wrong, and that was an uncomfortable truth. And so it's like, my personal opinion, culturally, sort of like that religion forms a form of like emotional blanket for us in some capacity, right? Generally speaking, like culturally, generally speaking, right? And this is like not just Christianity. It's sort of like from a lens and framework of sort of understanding, great, how does like human psychology work in the first place? It's like, okay, we don't really like not knowing things. We have a rightful fear of the unknown. This is shown, generally speaking, through like lots of psychological studies on the different kinds of bias we have, right? So there's in-group bias, there's large group bias, there's biases that we have in favor of the kinds of people that we've grown up around. There's confirmation bias, where we're looking specifically for the thing. Like our brains work in ways that don't align with formal, rigorous study, right? And so it takes like concerted effort to then create a framework that allows us to more accurately understand the world instead of deferring to the shortcuts that these biases allow us to do. And it's like the question is like, well, why are these biases important? It's like, because when it comes to like surviving the world, if these biases sort of are derived from the fact that curiosity sometimes gets you killed, and that means the brains that were more likely to survive and develop, were the ones that had these biases in the first place that stopped us from being curious at times, then that makes a lot of sense. And so what are Michael and Hatter potentially getting at more broadly? It's like maybe they're more broadly getting at the fact that, okay, it's taken the development of modern society to remove a lot of dangers from our immediate existence, to then give space for our culture to move into one of more curiosity and investigation and understanding, rather than to deferring to the traditional religious and cultural explanations that we had for things, right? So just because like Christianity is relatively new doesn't mean it's any different to all the other sort of cultural and religious practices that have existed throughout human existence, and doesn't mean it's not, vaguely doing a similar thing to all of them. That is, and excuse me for using, such a catchphrase, doing effectively the God of the gaps explanation of how the world works. Now, if you really get into the nitty-gritty of Kurt Gödel and sort of his two theorems, one like incompleteness and completeness theorems, what those specifically mean, like the interpretation of the conclusions you can make of his two theorems, right? It's like one can be far more rigid in terms of like, only for certain kinds of systems can we say with certainty that there is incompleteness within them, and not necessarily all of them. I'm still not fully decided on how I want to understand what Gödel is getting at in terms of to what extent you can continue to draw conclusions. But that like really gets to the heart and core of like philosophy as a practice, and how that extends into science and maths and history, etc. But I think through this lens of human psychology, it's far simpler, at the very least, to at least look at this pursuit of science and of knowing things and of maths, generally speaking, historically, as being associated with modernity. And I don't think Professor Kevin Carnahan, like, he should know this, I would hope. Maybe he's not gone into Gödel very much and like number theory and science the way I have, and maybe he's not gone very much into psychology the way I have, historically, and maybe he doesn't understand like what evolutionary pressures exist to create the brains that we have, and sort of why we're seeing a developing facet of them with modernity that sort of allows certain parts of them to be highlighted culturally, with respect to the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of understanding, right? But I think it's very clear, even though he wants to really say, no, history is not the Dark Ages. It's like, history isn't the Dark Ages. Like Michael says at the very beginning of this video, which he just completely glosses over, it's humans have always been curious. What Michael and Hannah are really getting at is that there is this overall pursuit of curiosity that we have seen increase culturally, and it's come from not this automatic assumption that certain things shouldn't be known. Now, whether that's right to attribute to, Aquinas, Augustine or not, is a separate debate. But if we're talking generally, the trend of humanity, it's like, yeah, most of the time we're ignorant. That is our starting position in terms of the overall landscape of human knowledge. Most of our knowledge is barely above this baseline in terms of how we actually understand the world. And what we've done in recency is there's been this huge jump in understanding in terms of the overall timeline, right? And it's like how far you zoom out, obviously then compresses like how rapidly that knowledge has gone up. So it's like no one is out here saying that we haven't learned things very, very rapidly. In terms of the broad timeline, but no one's also saying here, yeah, in the 1500s we knew absolutely nothing. It's like, no, we had crazy cool maths well before the 1500s that's like allowed us to then build upon it, and that's what human knowledge is. It's built upon other human knowledge, right? That gets bounced around the same way that philosophical ideas get bounced around. It's only through those bouncings around that we then like are able to polish and refine, and then with those ramifications produce even more ideas. And like when you conceptually think about like how numbers evolved, it's like 0 didn't exist originally, and then we extended this idea of just numbers generally into zeros, and then we extended this idea, and correct me if I'm going to get the order wrong that things happened in, because maths didn't happen in one place. Maths happened all over the place, and it happened at various points in time. It's like Isaac Newton, just in his year off away from studying because of, I think it was a plague or something, is just like, yeah, I'm gonna describe what I think is happening when the thing drops. And in the process of doing so, he's like, I need calculus. But like, he didn't think of it that way. He was just like, maths doesn't let me do this. What if it did? And he just made calculus. And here's the cool thing. He wasn't the first person to make it. Maybe I'm wrong. Like, again, my recollection of like the order and things, but he wasn't the only person to come up with calculus. He wasn't the only person to think of like, what if I think about how I can use maths to do this kind of thing, right? Somebody else also thought of that. And so when we're talking like, okay, so we had counting numbers, and then we introduced 0, and then we introduce what if there's things in between 0, and then what if we extend this idea of like what powers are, but do it in backwards, and we end up with irrational square roots, and then through extending Pythagorean a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and taking it away from geometric shapes and extending it into sort of just numbers generally, we landed in sort of the idea that actually like we can have two negative numbers multiplied together to equal a positive number, and that lands us in this then general equation that allows us to solve quadratics, right? And then we go even further, and we sort of start ending up in these positions of handling circles and geometries, and understanding that like, okay, well, like actually we can do it this way or this way, but our framework doesn't allow us to do this. Well, now we need complex numbers. And it's like, then you ask yourself, well, hang on, complex numbers became like an integral tool for Schrodinger to like develop a quantum wave function that worked for a dynamic, like non-closed system. And this guy's arguing that it's a myth that modernity is enlightenment. And it's like, no one's arguing it's enlightenment in the sense of no knowledge and all knowledge. But if he doesn't have the lens and the eyes to see that there's been this clear increase in knowledge because of this process, then like he's a fool. And I say that in the very real sense of what I think a fool is, which is somebody who, whether intentionally or not, is ignorant on something. And like I say that as somebody who's been a fool and is still almost certainly foolish in various facets. Like, I would hope that the same way that I feel about myself 5 years ago and 10 years ago, etc. It's like, I think about to what I thought when I was 15 versus 20 versus 25. It's like, okay, 15 is the worst, 20 was better, 25 was even better. But I'm thinking, hey, when I was 25, like, man, I kind of also didn't do certain things that I do now, that I think now. Like, I'm a much better person now than I was at 25. And I don't think I was a bad person at 25, but I was certainly more ignorant in terms of how I understood myself and how I understood others and how I process. Oh man, I'm way better now. And it's my genuine hope that at 35 I feel this exact same way about how I am now. At 35 I look back at how I was at 30 and I go, whoa, yeah, I was doing all right, but man, I'm way better now. And that's what I think this man is. I think he's a fool because at his age and the fact that he's a professor in all of this, it seems to me very clear that he still just has these, what I would describe as like fundamental cognitive blind spots to how he engages with other people's ideas, which is that he's got a clear emotional bias against this like adherence to science. And that's not to say that there aren't good critiques you can make against like physicists and mathematicians in their belief of like, this pursuit of absolute certainty and knowledge. It's like Gödel made that very clear that like, okay, no, there's certain things that you will never be able to finish, and it's like, okay, that adds a whole philosophical lens to how we do maths and science, and really shakes this foundation that like, oh, maths will be finished at some point. It's like, but I think he's taking that emotional bias and he's just letting it come through his content. And he's also let that happen since, I think I saw that it said he joined in like 2024. Let's see. If I click on this, oh, it doesn't. I thought I saw it say somewhere that he joined in 2024. And it's like, okay, so he's been doing this for 2 years or so. And this is what he's doing. And these are the kinds of ideas that he's perpetuating, but not just the kinds of ideas, this kind of methodological approach. But he's not 30 like me. Like he's also not just some random guy. Now, to be fair, I don't think I'm a random guy in the sense of like, I know with a degree of certainty that I am like far more intelligent than an astronomical percentage of the population. But like, that doesn't like justify me feeling like I know more than everybody else. And in fact, like my default, as much as I can, is I try and presume that I don't, because everybody that I have ever encountered ever, regardless of their overall intelligence, always knows something I don't. Always. I've never met somebody who doesn't know a thing that I don't know, even if I know generally more than them. So it's like, okay, it's foolish for me to encounter anybody and just presume, oh, because I must be smart, that means I know more than everybody else. It's like, no, if I follow somebody's working and their working is good, then like I can learn from them. So I try and do that. But what I mean is like, okay, like I'm just some guy. It's like, I'm not a professor. I don't have a PhD. And yet, I would argue, at least here, I am capable of exercising and demonstrating a far more rigorous form of methodology when it comes to thinking about ideas in the first place than this man is, who apparently doesn't just have a PhD, but is also a professor of philosophy. And it's like, okay, that's a really bad situation to be in from my perspective. Because I'm just making random YouTube videos. This guy's making Instagram videos. But it's worse than that. This guy's not just making Instagram videos. He's in charge of educating other people. And the people who go to his lectures will see his Instagram videos. That's what this man is. It's like and this is why I feel very like frustrated when I encounter him. So it's my genuine hope that, like, I doubt he'll ever see this video. If he does, hello, Professor Kevin Carnahan. I hope you've not been too immediately and personally offended by the things that I've said. And I hope that even if you are, that you have the emotional maturity to understand that this is coming from a position of the pursuit of intellectual rigor in order to not fall for the same shortcomings that you accuse other people of falling for. And this is an ongoing process that everybody will have to do. It's like no professor's ever going to be perfect at that. Everybody's always going to have some degree of blind spot. But you are a public figure now. 126,000 followers, I think, is what it says, right? Yeah. You have a lot of people who listen to you. And that is not your best work. And, I don't know what your best work is. I haven't encountered it. I haven't gone on to look at what your best work might be. But if this is what you are producing generally, it seems pretty poor form when I can say that there are first-year university students, 18-year-olds who can engage with philosophical argument practices better than you can in terms of not strawmanning people, at least in this particular video. And that's bad. That's really bad. That is a poor reflection, I think, on your capacity to continue to be open-minded and curious about what other people may know that you don't, or what other internal assumptions and biases that you have. And it's I think that's you've done a very bad job. And so extending more broadly, it's okay, so what have I tried to do in this video? It's I have tried to demonstrate verbally the internal workings of what I do when I encounter this complex, intertwined combination of intellectual and emotional bias, I guess, for lack of a better term. The shortcuts that are taken here as a result of emotion to lead to bad intellectual decisions, and then how the way then that information is presented allows me, elicits an emotional response within me, and then how I have to personally handle that emotion. It's and hopefully you can see, it's I'm not completely intellectually rigorous. It's I get impassioned when I'm thinking and talking about this, because frustration's an emotion. It's I'm being frustrated by this man and by what actions he has taken. And so it's not wise of me to bottle that up and ignore it. It's instead far better for me to bring it out and be transparent with myself about it and try and figure out what is it that is frustrating me. And it's for lack of a better term, it's this sort of authoritarian, prescriptive, biased, closed-minded view of that sort of comes through this video. All right, now there was one other video that I thought was really good. This one. Yeah,
I thought the whole point of having an ethical theory was to tell us what right and wrong are.
Alex O'Connor has gotten so
Alex O'Connor thought the whole point of an ethical theory was to tell us what right and wrong are. Interesting starting point. Now, I've seen Alex O'Connor as well a little bit. Similar, I'm familiar with his work. I don't watch a lot of it. And maybe I'll at the very end of this video, I'll discuss why that's the case. But that's the starting point. And then we're going to see Professor do this. He's doing a bait and switch, I guess. People have really good terms for philosophical fallacies or and I don't know any of those words, so it's just I'm saying a bait and switch, and what I mean is, but maybe that's not the right word, but what I mean is that basically Kevin's about to build Alex up in order to knock him down with this specific example. So he's saying, oh, Alex is normally really good at this, but That's what we're about to see.
Good at many areas in philosophy that I always find it disappointing that he hasn't in ethics. Here, for instance,
Now, actually, I just want to touch really briefly on this disappointment language that Kevin always uses. It's one of emotional power. What I mean by that generally is that we don't care if some stranger's disappointed in us. But like we don't even think that strangers are disappointed in us. Right? Why? Because disappointment is that you had this expectation of somebody that then wasn't met. And what that means is like, okay, so the people who actually really have expectations of us are the people who know us. The people who know us who are then disappointed by us not meeting their expectations typically are like disappointed because they're expecting more of us. It's like, okay, so it's a moral shortcoming when somebody's disappointed in me. It's like that's meant to make me feel ashamed. And it's like, okay, I don't like that because this man is always like sort of effectively implying that it's like anytime he's critiquing somebody else, they should feel ashamed for their shortcoming. Whereas like my perspective is this, it's like every human is making mistakes all the time and you're just unaware of them, right? Like all the time. And it is not in any way good to make people feel ashamed for genuine mistakes, right? It's like, no, we want people to be able to see their mistakes for what they are, but not feel shamed, because if you shame people for their mistakes, you might change their behavior not to be one of reflection and change and growth, but to be one of like like doubling down, or they might get defensive, because like shaming people doesn't always elicit a good response. We see this in men all the time, right? Men who've not encountered sort of their sense of self being sort of challenged, or their identity, and then when it happens in the real world, and often it comes from women, it's like they feel this maybe they feel shame or they feel weakness, but it gets challenged, and then like you see a lot of times the men who've never gone through that process of like actually having to emotionally process that, they can shortcut to anger and at times to violence. And it's like, okay, well, so what do we not want to do necessarily? We don't want to be going out of our way just perpetuating this shaming culture. It's like, that's not helpful. It's like pointing out somebody's mistake, even and I want this man to feel ashamed, but I want him to feel ashamed because he should be doing better, because he's not some 30-year-old who's figuring it out. He's a grown-up. He's an old grown-up who should know far better. It's like, oh, however Kevin might be feeling if he happens to watch this video, that feeling of like maybe anger or frustration of like, what do you mean? What's this child saying? Why should I be ashamed? Like whatever defensiveness that may elicit within him. It's like, okay, well, if you don't like how you feel, imagine how you make other people feel. And then the inverse is like, well, if he hears everything I'm saying and he doesn't get defensive and he's able to reflect and he's able to go, okay, well, like, the things that I'm saying, maybe they're right, and maybe I have been doing this and I should do better. And if he's a grown up and he's able to do that and he's not able to be emotionally short-circuited into being defensive, etc., then what I really want to say is, well, was it the fact that I shamed him? Did that in any way allow him to better easily process the criticism that I have? And the short answer is absolutely not. So I don't like this general disappointment flavor, this general shaming flavor that he uses, because for people who already have the emotional maturity to process their own mistakes, you don't need it. For the people who don't, you aren't allowing them to process their mistakes. He's not enabling people to grow.
He just seems fundamentally confused by a set of modern presuppositions about ethical theory.
Okay, so this is the reason why I wanted to use this other video. Kevin Carnahan has, at least from my two videos that I've presented, and obviously he may have far more nuance than this, but I only get to see the surface of him that he presents through Instagram, so it's not my fault that this is the limited version of himself that I have been presented, because it's the version he's chosen to present. It seems like he has it out for anybody who is in favor of modern ideas, right? That's the same thing he used to attack Hannah and Michael, that they're enthralled with modernity and enlightenment, right? And he's doing the same with Alex right now, saying that, you know, he's using presuppositions from modern ethical theory. It's like, well, should I use ethical theory from like, 1000 BC, where they were just like, yep, black people are bad. Maybe that's not good modern ethical. Maybe the ancient ethical theory is bad. It's like, I don't know if that's what they thought, to be honest. Like, I don't know the history well enough. But just because something is modern doesn't mean that this person is choosing it because it's modern. And that pisses me off. It's like, Kevin did this for Hannah and Michael. He's doing it for Alex right now. Just because somebody's core idea is rooted in modern thinking doesn't mean that they're choosing it because it's rooted in modern thinking, right? They could be choosing it because they've seen a lot of the non-modern thinking and gone, that is silly, and I'm going to pick this other idea that isn't silly. And that'll tie later into my final video about, like, why I don't watch certain people, generally speaking. But, like, let's hold on to that.
Modern moral theory, like most of the stuff from the 1700s to the 1950s, presupposed that ethics was projected by minds upon the world. And if
So, 1700s to 1950s presupposes that ethics is projected. Like, I don't like this word presupposes. And again, it's like probably tied to my lack of familiarity compared to Kevin with respect to the landscape of, like, modern ethical theory from the 1700s through to the, like, 1950s. So that's like my initial objection there. But what I actually want to get more deeply into is, like, okay, is it that it presupposes from an axiomatic perspective? As in, we're just going to assume that it's true that ethics is just projected? Or is there actually some reasoning and logic behind why that seems to be like the case that is reasoned and has been developed as a reason over time? And maybe that was only, like, really synthesized from, like, 1950 onwards, but it took from the 1700s to get there. Anyway.
If that's true, you should be able to come up with some mental formula that will give you the right conclusion about every ethical question.
So, his argument is that, like, oh, well, like, the presupposition is that, like, ethics is projected. If that's the case, then we can just come up with a formula that, like, answers it completely. There's a separate thing tied into, like, Gödel there that I is probably worth getting into, but he's saying, oh, well, that would mean that you could do this, and
thus,
you can't.
Modern moral philosophers spent their time arguing about what the right equation was.
What was the...
I thought the whole point of having an ethical theory was to tell us.
We're gonna start again. They were arguing about what the right equation was. I just want to watch it from his whole
right and wrong are.
Alex O'Connor has gotten so good at many areas in philosophy that I always find it disappointing that he hasn't in ethics. Here, for instance, he just seems fundamentally confused by a set of modern presuppositions about ethical theory. Modern moral theory, like most of the stuff from the 1700s to the 1950s, presupposed that ethics was projected by minds upon the world.
Ethics is projected by minds upon the world.
And if that's true, you should be able to come up with some mental formula that will give you the right conclusion about every ethical question.
So, here's the little sneaky setup that I think is sneaky. Whether it's intentional or not, separate thing, but sneaky. What that implies is that, okay, well, if you can't come up with a ethical formula to answer every ethical question, it would mean that the presupposition is wrong. That is to say, it would mean that, like, ethics isn't then projected by minds onto the world, right? That's, like, the setup he's doing.
Thus, modern moral philosophers spent their time arguing about what the right equation was. Was it the utilitarian equation, or was it the categorical imperative, etc.? But that's just confused, because that's not what morality is about in the first place.
So he's saying that that's wrong. Like, it's confused. And I don't know if he's saying that answering that question is confused, or if he's saying that the presupposition is confused in terms of morality just being projected from our minds because it's confused about what morality is in the first place. Let's see.
It turns out that goodness is always about a fit between a particular kind of being and the world.
Goodness is always about a fit between a particular kind of being and the world. I guess.
But if this is right, then it should not be the case that your theory will always give you the correct conclusion.
So, like, but he hasn't in any way demonstrated why that statement was true in the first place. It's like his statement, oh, goodness is about a particular, a fit between a particular being and the world. It's like, and then he's just said, but if that's the case, then like there's different answers for depending on the being that you're looking at, and that means, but it's like he hasn't in any way shown why what he said is true in the first place.
About the world, or that your theory should never need to be revised.
Or that your theory should never need to be revised. Like, again, that's tying into this fundamental idea that you can just have a complete finished theory.
In light of your perceptions about the world. If this is true, then your theory will need to be checked by your perception, and your perception will need to be checked by your theory.
I don't know how you check your perception with your theory.
And this is what classic and contemporary philosophers have recognized about ethics. Aristotle famously said that ethics will need to check by the appearances of the world, the perceptions of the many and the wise. John Rawls.
Okay. He's just using appeal to historical authority figures right now. Like, it's very difficult to follow what logic this man may or may not have. And fair enough. He's presenting a very short video and shortcutting than a lot of like the foundational knowledge that he definitely knows that I don't. But that's, I guess, generally like what I don't like about this video. It's like I don't know how he's saying certain things with such certainty without actually proving them.
Rawls talks about achieving reflective equilibrium between abstract theory and particular moral perceptions. But Alex is so stuck in modern moral presuppositions.
Cool. At least we get to tie all these rambling, like, not very well connected into what the original video is. Alex is apparently stuck in these modern moral presuppositions.
That he thinks the fact that we need this equilibrium is a critique of moral theory. In what other area would this even work? You couldn't do music theory without listening to music and revising the theory on that basis.
He's saying, okay, like, the way in which we construct morality is about back and forth. Yeah, okay, hang on.
You couldn't do science without observations and revising theory on that basis. But this is
couldn't do science without observation, revising theory. Yes,
true is not a critique of science or music theory. It's just to say that all kinds of theory need perpetually to be checked against perceptions about the world. This is exactly the kind of mistake that Alex has moved past in other areas of philosophy. I just wish he could do it in ethics. Aristotle is disappointed. Do better.
I thought the whole point of having an ethical theory was to tell us what right and wrong are.
Delightful. Okay, so full video. So here's a fun one. I hadn't watched that whole video, but really beautifully. It seems very clear, superficially, that Alex is proposing a hypothetical question to critique some argument that somebody else has made that is hinging on these presuppositions, right? I don't think Alex is asking a real question based on his worldview. it does not in any way seem to follow from the way he asks his question, phrases it, the way he's looking. Just none of what that video shows at the start seems to be of one where Alex is genuinely confused and really stuck in this idea that modern that ethics is just meant to be this closed, complete theory. And I think that's I think. Oh, yeah, you know what? Let's just do another. Alex O'Connor. I thought ethics. What? Where did my finger? Hopefully, I've obviously misquoted. Hopefully, this at least gets us to the video that we want to find. Can I just find the YouTube video? Bum, 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 bum. Well, isn't this interesting? Yeah, let's just go watch on YouTube. But isn't that interesting? Huh? This looks like a video from Alex O'Connor saying why there is no moral right or wrong. Wow, that's so interesting, isn't it? Now this was 7-ish months ago, I think. Now, we could bother to watch the whole video, but let's go back to this. This was a week ago. So something's really interesting. I don't know where this video is from. Maybe he's responding to a very old Alex video, and maybe Alex has changed. But I think if I've got a video where Alex is talking to a Christian about why there is no moral right or wrong, that would align with your criticism, Kevin. It's like you are doing a misrepresentation on purpose. It took me 2 seconds to do a little search. I didn't know this video existed. It took me 2 extra seconds to be like, Alex O'Connor, right or wrong thing, and I just happened to YouTube and oh wow. So
how do you explain morality?
Let's look at this
on materialism, and I'm really curious if you kind of follow why that's a problem for me. But
Yeah,
help that make sense to me.
Of course. I think you're right to point out that ethics is a difficult thing to ground on materialism, but there are a few things to say. The first is that I'm not a moral realist, so if you're looking for me to justify the existence of good and bad as sort of real properties of the universe, you're not going to find it, because I don't believe that they exist. There are...
Dude, Kevin, I need you to just to have some humility, right? The same way I'm obviously I am now intellectually high grounding myself compared to you, and I feel super confident right now, so I'm gonna maybe speak with a degree of confidence, and then if it turns out I'm wrong, somebody's gonna shame me because I'm gonna be like, oh, I'm so stupid for thinking this. But okay, even though I'm doing that, I want you to understand, if it took me that amount of effort to find a video where Alex, at the very beginning, tells you that he doesn't think goodness and badness even exists, that he doesn't think that there is right or wrong, and it's literally there in the title. And you could, here's the thing, I'm not watching the next 20 minutes. If I really wanted to understand what Alex thinks about right or wrong, I would watch the full video. And that's what you should have done before you actually painted what his perspective is. But what is very clear to me is that I don't think Alex is in any way presupposing the modern view of ethics, which is that there is, it's projected, and because it's projected, there's this finished equation. My perspective on ethics, having studied it nowhere near in depth as I'm assuming Alex has, but I would also presume potentially more so than you have, because you're a fool who can't even like research. So I don't understand how you even got a PhD if this is the degree to which you can like investigate anything you encounter, right? Is if you can't investigate Alex's beliefs when it took me 2 seconds to find a video that actually gives me insight into what he thinks, right? And yeah, I'm doing this with you. I'm only looking at your 3-minute Instagram videos, but why am I doing that? I don't think you know very much about how to critique other people's ideas. It's like if I wanted to know about religion and philosophy and the history of it all, yeah, when you make those videos, ooh, that's very interesting. I find that somewhat useful to listen to. But your ability to critique other people and understand what it is that they're saying and to just completely decontextualize it, like seemingly, again, I can't know with certainty where this video is from. I'm not looking, but like, if it takes me 2 seconds to find like a video that just shows what Alex actually believes and I could spend 20 minutes watching it, I'd probably find, like, that you are just misrepresenting him, right? You are doing this on purpose because you're lazy. That's it. That's all it is. It boils down to the fact that you have a method of producing content that is tied to always concluding that so-and-so would be disappointed, somebody should do better. And then you use little snippets to create that content. And what you have fallen into the trap of is you have no intellectual rigor. You have lost all of that in this process, right? That doesn't mean that you can't exert intellectual rigor when you are actually doing something that isn't this process. But it just becomes so clear that that's lost when you make this content. You do not have the ability anymore to actually steelman people. Like, and let's look at this. It's fine to assert this as your expert opinion based on your scholarship, but asserting this is known to be true or settled in philosophy of ethics seems disingenuous or overstated. So it's like, people already disagree with you. Okay, that's really nice, because I was really confused by your logic. I did my best to understand what you were saying when it came to that little snippet of history that you're talking about before you tied it back into Alex. I really struggled to follow, and I presumed that it was because I didn't understand certain things. You were talking about things that I probably didn't know about, etc. Somebody else has just gone, this isn't even decided. I was like, maybe that is. I'm confused. What does your point have to do with Alex's? They're not compatible, at least the way I see it. He says ethical theories should tell us right from wrong, and your point is that goodness is a relationship between a particular being and the world, but doesn't that fit? Well, again, I just don't think Alex is even saying it should tell us right from wrong. I think it's clear that Alex is debating somebody here, and he's taking a presupposition from somebody else. Like, so who are the people who actually think that like a moral system is meant to be complete and tell us right from wrong? Now you've got these modernists, from the 1700s onwards who believe that, and they were arguing about that. But who else does that? People who defer to authority when it comes to morality, right? Who are those kinds of people? Well, historically, religious people. Historically, the practice of religion is one of authoritarian dictatorship when it comes to morality. This is bad, this is not bad, and it's black and white, and it's always like that, right? That has historically been ethics, right? Like, that's how it's historically been, at least in the time frame that I'm thinking about, right? It maybe not, if you go back far enough, maybe not the case. If you go to different areas, maybe not the case. So I guess, I'm very influenced by like my understanding of history and the locality that I really understand and the culture that I really understand with regards to Christianity. But like, that's the thing you're talking about too, right? You're a Christian guy, it would seem. At the very least, you do a lot of defense of Christianity as much as you possibly can, although I think very respectfully, you do a lot of critiques of bad apologetics of Christianity, because there's a lot of bad apologetics. So I think you do a far better job of defending Christianity from a cultural perspective. But when it comes to like talking about ethics, and you're just absolute obvious like straw man of Alex's argument by taking this tiny little snippet, just again seemingly completely out of context, where even from the snippet alone it seems clear to me that he's posing this as a hypothetical to somebody else in the middle of a debate, because that's what he really does. And then if I go and I spend 2 seconds looking for it, I find a video that demonstrates that he actually believes a completely different thing than what you're proposing. It's like, I don't know how you can do this. You just... Alright. I had a bit of a crash out. Understandable. I'm actually very, very tired as well. So, this is why I'm making this video today instead of pursuing some other things. And maybe I'll go for a little walk and that'll help with my energy. Let's tie in and wrap up this video. Why don't I watch Alex O'Connor? And why don't I watch Michael or Hannah consistently? And why don't I bother to watch, lots of what Kevin has to say consistently? So, and maybe this is a privileged position that I get to exist in. And I've sort of already alluded to this, but it's probably worth saying, like, just in a well drawn out way, like what my relationship is with learning and my brain and sort of the system through which we learn. I've already mentioned that I'm grossly intelligent. Just in a purely traditional sense of like what IQ is, and I could talk to the hills about why IQ is flawed, and like I understand pretty well the science behind it as a psychometric, the fact that it has a lot of problems in terms of its capacity to measure this abstract concept of intelligence because of its inability to be consistently reproducible, and its inability to account for socioeconomic impact and cultural impact. And it's like that's sort of the whole process of science generally, right? Though, is like, okay, it's a test that we keep trying to get to improve, we keep trying to make better, we use it to then understand as well like facets of like why certain things aren't improving. So it's this super cool research that I got to encounter recently with regards to IQ as a psychometric, where somebody was able to sort of draw links between the fact that races for quote unquote a term, that have a representation within media, within society, that is more negative, like generally more negatively impacted by that representation when it comes to the children, right? So it's like, okay, you can be a minority, sorry, I say minority, I'm still Western framework, my bad. You could be an African American raised in a well-off socioeconomic neighborhood, adopted into a white family, right? Who are also intelligent, right? Have all the things in place, have all of the education, etc. And the argument traditionally has been, well, that should mean that like that child should be able to should have no environmental impact impeding their ability to cognitively develop. And what this recent literature was proposing and presenting statistical evidence for was the fact that actually, by virtue of the fact that African Americans are represented within society in negative ways as a result of their systemic oppression, as a result of their lower socioeconomic status, and then all the mechanisms that follow on from that, and the sort of racism that is effectively vicariously experienced, and the stress that is vicariously projected onto such a child in this situation, is that stress is actually like it impedes cognitive development. You're like, wow, that's so interesting. to understand about this psychometric of IQ. And we get into so it's like that's all my, like I'm sure there's more context that I don't understand about IQ as a psychometric, but there is a lot of like weight to it as a valuable thing, and like my relationship with it unfortunately was it was set up really poorly as a child, because I was unfortunately taught unintentionally to attach my self-worth, my identity, and my ego into the fact that I was very smart, whilst having severe ADHD, which is a whole separate thing. And so like it's taken a lot of time for me to intentionally try and address that egoism, to then step away, I guess, from that entirely, but then in recency to sort of like step back and go, well, actually, no, like I am grossly intelligent, but like, what does that fundamentally mean? It's like, okay, I have a memory that does things that like are silly, basically. Like, I didn't realize this until much later on, and when I was told, is that certain people in my life thought that I had an eidetic memory, thought that I had a photographic memory, because I would just remember everything, basically. It's like I would hear something once and it would just be stuck there. It's like I can tell you with certainty I don't have an eidetic memory, as far as I understand it. Maybe somebody would assess me and they'd be like, you do. But I do know that I have a really good memory, right? I'm very aware that it takes no cognitive effort for the majority of how I experience and learn and hear about anything, for me to recall it later on, and to recall it far, far later after the fact, having only heard it once, in ways that just the majority of the population don't. The second thing that my brain does really, really well, that I think in particular has been something that I've developed far more in adulthood, is pattern recognition, right? Which is obviously like, another big facet of intelligence, is that I am really good at identifying patterns, but in particular, in the stuff that I've spent a lot of my adult life doing, what I have found, generally speaking, is I'm very good at identifying patterns that other people miss. And again, like, not on purpose, it just sort of happens. And so when it comes to then how I listen to this content, or how I listen to, Michael and Hannah or Alex, it's like, and I think I sort of touched on this with Friendly Geordies, and there's a lot of other content creators that I've touched on as well with regards to this, is that where I'm trying to learn and understand something, and a content creator demonstrates through their content that they're very good at presenting just sort of, I think, for lack of a better term, very purified information in a way that's easy to digest. Right, because encountering ideas for the first time, actually, like, digestion is a useful thing when you need to become aware of something. Then I'll tend to often go back to the same kind of source. But this idea that you'll ever get stuck on the same sort of source, I think, is like the trap of everybody. It's like, if you think that, like, Einstein could tell you about everything in physics, you've fallen into just a foolish trap, because there were things that he got wrong. There were things that he thought the universe can't be this way, and that so far it seems like the evidence that we've then discovered since would demonstrably show us that, like, he was wrong to think that way in the first place. Well, not in the. Let me re-clarify. That's worth rephrasing. He wasn't wrong to think that in the first place, but his intuition was wrong. He was right to think about it being something that was worth figuring out, and he was wrong about his intuition. And this is, I think, really important. It's like, I have very good intuition for, I think, where I think there should be patterns, how I think we should think about problems, etc. And I think I have very good intuition as well for my propensity to also think, to figure out what, like, the right solution probably is. But so often I'm wrong anyway, that, like, it's worth me exploring and investigating all sorts of ideas and all sorts of people. And in particular, this is why I'm still, like, undecided on Gödel and sort of the broader implication. It's like I've seen both sides of arguments that people have made with regards to like Gödel's incompleteness theorem in particular. Obviously, he had two, and some people use that to basically say, hey, you can't know anything about anything, blah blah blah. You know, a system that can create infinite number of things within it means that it'll never be complete. You'll always have something that like definitely exists within the system and can't be derived from any of the existing axioms, and must be, you know, must elicit a new axiom to include it, and then in the process of doing that, you always end up with one extra thing that then like always falls into that category of definitely within the system, but not provable from within the system in its current state, requires an extra axiom, right? Okay, like that's one side, and then I've seen another side that really goes ham on the mathematical rigor that that Gödel was really approaching his whole argument from, and so then what that means for the narrowness of the context in which you can look at what he's saying and believe it to be true, but then how it unintentionally gets sort of extrapolated into other fields that it can't be applied to, and that's a really, like, I think generally good example of like I'm undecided on how I feel about that right now. And there's like two reasons. One, it's an astronomically complicated thing to wrap your head around. For me, for anybody. Like what Gödel was getting at, what he was or wasn't able to show, etc. You know, like it's very easy to make false conclusions either way when it comes to sort of the implications. And why is that important then in terms of what I'm talking about when it comes to sort of not listening to any one particular person consistently? Because you'd think like, oh, well, like if you want to know more about something, you should really just find the expert and listen to them a whole lot. And it's like the short answer is because experts make mistakes. That was the point about the Einstein example that I was giving. It's like that guy was really smart. He knew a lot of things. He figured out a lot of things. Guy was cooking. He was wrong about other things, right? And when it comes to the exploration of very complicated ideas, I think it's a trap to fall into this idea. Two things. I think it's a trap to fall into this idea of like only listen to the experts. Secondly, I think it's a trap to fall into the idea that you need to fully understand a landscape before you can start thinking outside of the box in terms of like outside of, I guess, what everybody else thinks. But what I very specifically mean by that, and it's such a fine line between this, is that that is not a justification for woo-woo spiritual nonsense, for and also like how that exists within, you know, like obviously that the Dunning-Kruger effect, etc. What I mean by that is the same way that we've got examples of people talking with AI and then by virtue of how AI works, being tricked, convinced into thinking that they've, you know, figured out anti-gravity theories and maths, etc. You know, to the point that they propose their ideas, and then somebody has to come along and be like, "This just doesn't work for all of this stuff." It's like, okay, yeah, like don't do that. That's something we want to avoid. But the inverse is this. Even the process of learning about something, you are encountering the same issue in terms of your ability to understand it over and over and over. Maybe that's your inability to understand it. Maybe that's you are noticing something that the system as a whole hasn't yet explained, and you understand then like the blind spot of that system. And maybe that if you let go of that in the pursuit of just learning everything, you don't then explore that idea later on. What do I mean by that? It's like, okay, the stories that we have of really intelligent, you know, groundbreaking physicists, mathematicians, are ones in which, as they're engaging with, you know, the supposed authority figures of their time as like undergrads or you know, as graduate students learning from them, we have stories of them challenging the people they're learning from. being like, but what if this? Right? And it's like, that's so important to not lose, to not defer to authority, to just know, well, this person knows more than me, I shouldn't question them. Not to say that you should then also be disrespectful of like their obvious the obvious knowledge gap between you and them, but to say that like, okay, well, like if you just presume that something can't be done, yeah, you're not going to do it because you've already given yourself a lack of impetus. It's like it genuinely is the foolish pursuit that is slightly tied to ego a little bit. That maybe you know something that no one else has figured out. That is the only reason you could possibly pursue knowing something that nobody else has figured out, right? Like, you're not going to accidentally fall into a theory of relativity from this presupposition that everybody else knows more than you, so you should just listen to them first. It's like, silly. Like, you have to have just like a touch of delusion, I think, if you really, really want to understand the world. Because the moment you presume that everybody else knows more than you all the time, that you can't possibly recognize, like, you betray your brain, which is that your brain is basically just a machine that does pattern recognition. That's all it is. It's effectively AI. Right? It's bad at pattern recognition. You have to train it to be better at pattern recognition by like having other people who are better at pattern recognition train that into you. The same way we train AI models, right? It's like you don't start off really good at this. It's an acquired skill, and you can be worse at acquiring it if your education is bad, or if your childhood is this, or you don't get enough, or you can be really good at acquiring it. And there's obviously, like all sorts of genetics that go into sort of like the backbone mechanism in terms of the neurology behind how that happens. So like, sometimes you don't have very much control over it, but the stuff that you do have control over is this idea that like ultimately, eventually, maybe you just can know more than everybody else ever before you, right? That's how we got knowledge, is like somebody came along and thought, I think everybody else is wrong. I think it's this. And they like didn't let go of that despite all the pressure. And I think the only thing that's really important is this, is that like if you use that as your justification to hold on to an idea, you're a fool. But if you use that as your justification to throw off attacks to, from a position of appeal to authority, fair enough, right? And there's this really fine line, because what that requires is that for you to discern what an attack is, means you have to understand what the attacks are. That is to say, attacks that are from a position of appeal to authority are going to obviously be obvious ones that defer to, well, this professor says blah, blah, blah. So, fair enough. You don't have to engage with the this professor says aspect. But you should engage with what that person says, because they are an expert, and maybe they do know a thing that you don't know, right? And that's worth really understanding. And so it's like, that's been the fun thing, at least for me, in terms of, like I've studied psychology and philosophy and been involved in sports science and have had my own sort of processing when it comes to handling my own trauma and religion and developing as a human in terms of emotional maturity and regulating my nervous system, etc. It's like there are all these skills that stack up that then allow me to come back into maths and science after a very, very long time, and to understand that, like, okay, there's a lot of maths and science that I don't know, and like that's something that, like, if I'm interested in understanding and solving problems within that, I need to catch up. I need to spend some time really like wrapping my head around. But a better question is like, do I need to know all maths and science across the entire field to then be able to come up with new ideas? And I think it's a trap to think the answer is yes, because then you are basically forever not giving yourself permission to think of something new. And when you understand that, like, okay, even the best mathematicians don't know everything because maths is so broad that you can't know everything. Same way that even the best scientists don't know everything. Science is so broad that you can't know everything. It's like, okay, so what are we then like stuck with? It's like, okay, so there's a lot of experts who have very niche knowledge within a particular broad like topic, right? And so they're able to really explore further and further down into those niche ideas and maybe discover more things. But there's this like slightly bigger problem that I think AI has. It's one use case that I think is actually really good that is able to highlight for us is this. Where there are ideas that need to be derived from two really deep fields or more, humans are not there. We have like created an academic system that causes blind spots for us. And a very cool recent example of that was with regards to a perceived. I think it was like a combinatorics or probability problem within math. I'm gonna do a bad job of presenting this idea, so come at me, please. Like I'm just going off of this vague memory of my basic understanding of what it was, how it was solved with AI. But I think it was this idea that was to do with like perceived like probability combinatorics when it comes to like dropping something of unit length n and then like the likelihood that like it crosses over with however many other n units there are that have been dropped randomly, etc., into a space. Some kind of problem with that. I've done a really bad job. It's going to sound like some other problems, I'm sure. Ignore me and all of that. The general overview was that AI solved it, and it solved it with a completely like out of left field topic, like subject, that mathematicians didn't even think of and conceptualize would be relevant to solving this problem, because it was using complex space geometry, basically. It's like, okay, what does that tell us? It tells us that some problems that we're encountering in maths, for example, that seem to be derived from one subject field have solutions in other subject fields very easily. And this has also been a general trend in terms of how physicists, for example, like encounter, observational data, and then a mathematician might come along from a completely unrelated field and just be like, oh, I've seen what this is. This is this equation from this thing that I'm an expert in. And it's like, okay, what does that tell us? Niche knowledge is a shortcoming to understanding overall systems, to understanding overall problems, and then vice versa. Broad knowledge doesn't let you solve very, very niche, very specific problems, because generally speaking, we see a lot of very niche, very specific problems solved by people who are like, spent their lives in that specific field, exploring, this very, very specific problem. So there's this interplay there, and what I'm trying to get at is, if you are interested in pursuing knowledge and interested in understanding, it's like you can try and do both at the same time. You can try and stay quite broad in terms of your understanding of most things, and from that broadness, maybe you have an intuition for something that like is actually unique because you've thought about it from a perspective that isn't built on the biases of being very, very knowledgeable within a specific system. But then to understand, does my broad idea potentially work? Does it work for this problem? Like, I've got this background in this other stuff. If I then approach this specific thing that I don't have a lot of knowledge in, it's like you then have to do the work and speak to the subject matter experts within those specific fields to really get to the nitty gritty of like whether or not your idea may or may not apply there. And so AI maybe can be helpful with that. I have other reasons behind why, like, I don't really think that's very good generally anyway for the general world. Mainly that, like, actually we should be looking at developing our brain's capacity to be able to do that rather than outsourcing it to a robot, because I think people can do that actually. And that's the thing that I'm trying to do when it comes to the certain ideas that I'm pursuing right now. It's like I have this intuition for what I think will potentially be a very cool idea to pursue for a very long time that will potentially solve a lot of problems that exist within number theory and physics and maths, because I have this feeling, this intuition for the landscape of those systems and for what that means the solution might actually be. But then the key bit is that, like, it's going to take me a lot of time to develop the specific expertise, to learn from the experts within those specific fields that it will apply to generally, to understand whether or not my idea is right and how to refine it and how to formalize it. And so I think it's like humans are capable of doing what this AI has done with this specific problem that I mentioned, in terms of taking complex geometry and applying it to a problem that seemingly all other experts thought was unrelated. It's like, do you think AI is only capable of that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do you need to understand complex geometry to that extent in order to be able to then understand the other problems to that extent? It's like, no. You could know complex geometry and then just like encounter this problem and just go, well, what if I try and approach it from this perspective? And not really have an idea if it's going to be useful or not. And then you could just do it, and then you can find out, oh, it does work. It's like a human could have easily come up with that proof. It's foolish to think that they couldn't have. It's also understandable that, you know, it wouldn't happen at the same time frame that AI did it. But yeah. Anyway, that's my very, very long-winded rant about this guy. We are done.